I wanted to be a nurse. But then I wanted to be an artist. And that lasted until I was 11. So I went down the drain when I thought about Vincent van Gogh and how he didn't sell a painting until he was dead.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to The Patient's Perspective. In this episode, we'll be talking to Molvia, who is the mother of Christy. Christy sadly passed away. Molvia will be talking us through her story as a mother. She will also be providing us as medics with useful tips and advice as to how we can improve the patient journey.
My story is probably much the same as many other parents who have a child who lives with degenerative illness, in that I had a really strange feeling about my third child. She arrived having had two sons. She was the little girl that I was dreaming of, and she arrived and she was a beautiful, bubbly, very happy little girl. But there was just things that probably only a mother would notice about her. Sometimes she was quite tremulous. She seemed to tremble easily, and she didn't seem to thrive as well as the boys, in as much as she was very slow to grow, and she was very tiny for her age, always. And I started to take her to the doctors when she was probably about 2.5. And, you know, I would say to the doctor, I'm a little bit worried about Christy. And, you know, they would just look at her and examine her and say, oh, she's fine. She's a bit small, but she's okay. But, you know, don't worry about her. And then when she was around 3, she started to have this real obsession about how far were we going to be from a toilet. And I remember saying to her the one day, it's like taking my grandma out, you know, whenever we're going to go somewhere, you're always asking me this question, will there be a toilet? And she was laughing. But I took her to the doctors and I said, there is something not quite right. And then they started to infer that maybe I was a little bit over anxious about my daughter, because I was going through a divorce and I was too focused on her. And I got a little bit scared about where some of their comments were going. And so I stopped going to the doctors with her and just kept her at home and just worried to myself, really. And then over the next few years, she still continued to be quite slow in her growth. So, for example, starting secondary school at age 11, she was wearing age 7 clothes. You know, she was really small. And finally, there came a point where other people did start to notice that she was a little bit stumbly. And they'd comment and they'd say, she walks a little bit like a crab, you know, she goes sideways. She walks into the walls of the houses or the parked cars. She just doesn't seem to walk straight. And again, I didn't take her back because I just thought, well, she's just probably clumsy. And then I had my 4th child, and I was away from home for about 10 weeks because I had placenta previa. So I was in hospital due to hemorrhaging twice, and I wasn't allowed to be at home. And during that time, Christy visited a few times, but it's not the same as seeing somebody every day. And so when I eventually went home with baby Harrison, I really noticed just how stumbly Christy had become. And I did mention it to a health visitor who came to check the baby. And I said, I'm not really worried about the baby. I'm more concerned about Christy. But again, she said, oh, well, you know, she's always been a dainty little girl. She's probably fine. And this went on until she went for swimming lessons. So it was January 1999, and I decided that we had to crack this swimming problem because her brothers had learned to swim early, but Christy just couldn't swim. So I took her for swimming lessons, and the first lesson, I dropped her off, saw her into the water, saw her into her group, watched her for a little while, but like a busy mum, I had to rush out with the baby in the baby seat, go to the post office and dash back. And when I got back, they were just getting them all out of the water. So I took her, and the lady came up to me who ran the swimming group and grabbed my arm and said, you've got to take your daughter to hospital. I went, excuse me? And she said, there is something definitely wrong with your daughter. I went, oh, hang on a minute. What do you mean? And she said, she's really trembling. And I went, yes, I've noticed this. And I've taken her. And they have run little tests, but they keep telling me she's fine. And she grabbed my arm and squeezed it and said, take her now. I later found out that she knew a little boy who'd had a brain tumour. So it had reminded her. Anyway, I said to her, look, it's Friday evening. I cannot take her to the hospital now. That's not the way that we do it. We have to go to a GP, but I promise you I'll take her next week on Monday, which is what I did. And this time I said to the doctor, please just watch her walk. And she was 8 by now. And as she walked, you could see how her gait was off. And he said, yeah, we'll refer her again. And so when they referred her, they did a range of tests, including the touch my nose, touch your nose, touch my finger test. And she was all over the place. And I thought, that is really odd. And then they went to test her reflexes in her elbows and her knees. No reflexes. And I heard the consultant turn to a doctor and say, she has a very ataxic walk. But with that, they said, look, we need you to go and get an MRI. And then we'll see you after that. So that is what happened. I took her to Birmingham. I was in Wolverhampton, but I had to go to Birmingham to have an MRI. And as Christy came out of the MRI, I sent her off to her dad in the waiting room, and I collared the radiographer and said, look, apologies, because I know I'm not supposed to do this, but can you tell me, did you see a brain tumour? Because I think that if you didn't see a brain tumour, that my daughter has something really obscure. And if you tell me she has a brain tumour, I believe that you can probably take it away and it will be okay. And I just need to know. And she looked at me. I said, look, I'm not breaking down. I'm not going to cry. I just need to know. And she studied me for a second and said, I didn't see a brain tumour. And I just touched her arm gently and said, thank you so much. And then we left. I went off to the library after I dropped her home with my husband, and I sat in the reference section and pulled all the medical books I could find and looked up the one word that stuck in my mind, which was ataxic walk. And when I got home with my information, after I'd got the children into bed and after tea, I went on to Ask Jeeves. That's how long ago it was. There was no Google, it was Ask Jeeves. And I began to search some of the terms that I'd seen about genetic illness and things associated with ataxia. And eventually I found the story that a mum had posted, and I could have just changed the name. She had a little boy, but I just needed to change the name because everything was the same, even down to the toilet urgency and the tremors. And the illness was Friedreich's ataxia. So I contacted the hospital and I said, please could you ask Dr. Anderson, have you checked my daughter for Friedreich's ataxia? And the answer I got was, well, we've done a full screen, but you're going to have to wait for the results. She called me back a few hours later and confirmed that they hadn't done a specific request. They'd done a full genetic screen and that I needed to wait 6 weeks. But sure enough, 6 weeks later, I got a call. It was a Thursday evening, about 7 p.m. And I was clearing away tea, washing up. And the call came through and she said, Mrs. Maddox, I'm really sorry to tell you, but Christy does have Friedreich's ataxia. And I said to her, that's okay. I knew she had that. I just knew. It's just been like waiting for a bus. I just didn't know when the bus was going to come. I think that Friedreich's ataxia, being the type of condition it is, it attacks the neurological system. And so you end up with multiple conditions, comorbidities, as it were. And I feel that one of the things that is good about the way that the NHS handles this kind of condition is that they very quickly, once they've got a diagnosis, run through lots of tests to establish a baseline of where that patient sits in particular areas. So for instance, Christy's heart was checked, her hearing, her sight, her feet were examined because it can cause the feet to move, their muscles to move. So lots of those tests were run really quite quickly. So within probably 3 months of diagnosis, we had seen so many consultants, but we had a baseline for where she was and the impact that her body was experiencing. And I think that where they could offer support and treatment, they did that, because obviously with the genetic condition, there is no cure. You know, you can't fix it, but you can provide support. And they signposted me to support services and to OTs and to physios. They gave me messages in things like use it or lose it. So keep her muscles going as much as you can, and encourage her to do that. All of those things were good. I think that over the years, the things that were not so helpful was the fact that as an organisation, the NHS is quite often organised into silos, I would say. So you become a specialist in a certain area. You know, you're not a generalist. So you're a heart consultant, or you look after eyes, or you look after kidneys. That's good, because it means that you have somebody who is really focused on a particular area. But in a patient that has lots of conditions, you really need a joined up conversation about the impacts on that person. And often that didn't happen. You know, and as somebody who was not medically trained, although I feel like I am now, I've done so much research, I thought I had to do that, because how can I, if you held an egg on the palm of your hand, that is often how I felt. I felt that Christy was the egg, and that I could not allow my hand to tip, that I had to keep it really balanced so that she was safe. And the only way that I could feel safe was by becoming an expert myself in all of the impacts of her condition. And as they told me a new part was affected, understanding what that meant. And I really do feel that one of the lessons we need to learn is that we need to have joined up conversations. You know, I would often ask people to talk to each other. And I think that really needs to happen more. I know that it happens, for example, ahead of surgery, you have multiple discipline team meetings and to discuss a patient. But in day-to-day ongoing care, with somebody like Christy who had Friedreich's ataxia, then that didn't happen. You know, and I had lots of appointments all over the hospital, sometimes across multiple different hospitals, and that's very time consuming, it's very stressful. And if you are a person who struggles with literacy or understanding, then you're really at the mercy of people making the right decisions without talking to each other. And I think that's something that we really need to address. So because degenerative illness is always there, it's always present, it really touches every aspect of your life. And I think there's a real danger sometimes that people are viewed as their condition. They're not seen as a person. And Christy herself was really concerned about this. She was an extremely intelligent young lady, very bright, but she didn't want to be seen as somebody who was disabled. You know, she hated that term. She preferred to express that she lived with impairment. And she used to say to me, I'm not disabled, I'm very able. I just have to find a different way to do things, or I have to do it with assistance. But actually, I do what I want to do in my own way. And one of the things, as I said earlier, that we often talked about and made sure we did was lots of research. And that's very scary. I know we have Google. I know we started off talking about Ask Jeeves, and we moved on because we do have Google. But I meet people still today who tell me that their biggest time constraint or time spent is in research. And even if you go on to Google, how do you know that the information that you're seeing there is right? How do you know where it's come from? And for me, that was a really big issue. And so, as so often, you know, in our family, I thought, rather than keep complaining about these things, what are you going to do to address that issue? And so with Christy and her input, we were able to think about a health platform, which we've called Melting Ice Cubes. And very purposefully, because Christy didn't want the name disabled in it. And although ice can be cold and solid, it can also just melt away with the right conditions. And that's how Christy felt about living with impairment and ill health, that although it's there, that with the right conditions, the impacts can be softer and they're not as seen. And so what we worked really hard to do, and it took us 15 years, I know that sounds ridiculous, so many people were so used to how Google works that they would tell me that I was doing something that was impossible. Because my other ask was that I wasn't an organisation focused on one condition, because Christy had multiple. She ended up with multiple conditions and multiple impacts. And I'm so aware of people who are in exactly the same place. And so I wanted a platform where you could put in any condition, and that we would do the hard work because of the way that we've written our algorithms, and we would go off and we would pull in trusted information for you. And that's exactly what we do. But the other thing that Christy was really concerned about was she just wanted to live. You know, she wanted to be like her siblings. So they're not always spoken about in terms of condition. And she wanted to go to university, learn to drive, all of these things she did. And so she said to me, what I want, Mom, is a platform where I can go to and I can see other people who live with the same challenges or similar challenges getting on with life. And so in our platform, we have a search capability called, and we call it Everyday Life. And when you click on that, you see boxes. We've got things like travel, education, work. And when you select those options, it gives you video content. We use YouTube at the moment. We pull information from there. But people are talking about, you know, yes, I've got this condition, but I've climbed a mountain, or I've sailed a boat, and it's people talking about living. And yes, they may have faced challenges, but they're doing things. And that was really important to Christy. Melting Ice Cubes is a platform in its infancy. You know, we're a startup. We've only been launched just over a year. And we're just at the beginning of that journey. We have plans to bring so many more tools that help people really understand their conditions. And I didn't know it at the time, but the World Health Organization talks about how important health literacy is. And it has written a lot of information on how, if a person understands their condition, that they are able to join in and have a partnership approach with medical professionals in managing their own health. I think one of the drawbacks of the NHS is that we've led ourselves into a situation where we delegate our healthcare. You know, we stand back and be done to, rather than being active participants. And I found as a parent that if I was able to have an informed conversation, I was able to shape some decisions that were made around Christy that were more beneficial for her, the same in social care situations. And so Melting Ice Cubes really wants to help people do that. And we want to connect people so that they can make their own support groups on the platform and they can share their own stories. Because when you tell a story or when you speak about your experience, it makes something much less frightening than it was, much less scary. And it also supports your mental health in being able to talk. So Christy's ask was that Melting Ice Cubes would not be clinical, that it would be colourful, relaxed, and a friendly, supportive place. And I think that's what we've achieved in our build. And Christy's not here now, but when I look at Melting Ice Cubes, you know, I really feel that we have done what Christy asked us to do. And I feel that in everything that she went through, we learned so much, and it's not wasted. Her struggles and her challenges have enabled us to build a platform that is there free for use in society to help and support people with health. It's hard, isn't it, being a mom, for anybody, you know, especially with your first one, you're thrown in at the deep end. And for me, I have 5 children, and my middle one, Christy, was the child that was poorly. But how do you balance all of that? To sometimes book the trend of what people expect you to do is quite difficult. And I always did that. But when I look back now, you know, one of the effects that happened to me when Christy died was that I suffered severe facial paralysis. It's not so severe now, although I'm not perfect. I never was. But I do feel that the stress that I carried in all of those years and in all of those anxious meetings and getting up to speed and understanding and challenging decisions, I really feel that it had an impact on my system. And so often is the case, when something happens to you, you meet other people and similar things have happened. And it's come to my attention that quite a lot of people who have been through similar circumstances have had the same impact that I've had. And to cope with the death of a child is just, well, I just don't know how you get up and carry on each day. I mean, I'm doing it, but it's not right. And the impact on your system and your body, your mental health, they're profound. Melting ice cubes, what I want to do as well is begin to provide some support in that area. And especially for us, you know, we went through the whole situation of end of life. You know, 6 weeks, Christy was dying at the end. And I was fortunate because I was able to spend the time with her in hospital and then the last 2 weeks in a hospice. Don't expect it to happen to us. But actually, none of us knows what tomorrow will bring. And I think that in sharing and being open and being vulnerable, even though you're talking about things that are painful, it's a real support to other people. I find I'm working for me on melting ice cubes, that is probably one of the strongest things that helps me carry on. Well, on the days that I don't want to, on the days where we're having a family photo and there's a huge gap for me, I really am so fortunate to have something that touches her so much, that keeps me connected to her. And I just really hope that it brings what I want it to bring to so many other people.
If you found the video useful and enjoyed it, then make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of these videos, then subscribe and turn the bell on so you know when the next video in the series is coming out.